How many of you like to read a mix of genres? Today we're going to tackle how to combine another genre into historical fiction. Hello, welcome to Pen to Paper. I'm Leah Lindeman, author of the Canadian Reminiscence series. Today we are going to talk about how to combine another genre into historical fiction. Now, you could use these tips that I'm going to give you if you write another genre, another main genre for your book. So perhaps you're a fantasy writer, perhaps you're a horror writer, perhaps you are a sci-fi writer. There are certain ways to combine genres well, and then there are ways that you don't combine them well. But first of all, let's kind of cover the why of why you would perhaps want to combine two genres together. Well, the main reason is there's two reasons. A personal reason, maybe you enjoy the variety of two genres coming together in the books that you read and in what you write. And if that's the case, then you should go for it. Now, another main reason why you would combine genres is you cater to a broader audience. So perhaps you are a fantasy writer who likes to mix in romance into the story. Well, you're not only going to get perhaps fantasy readers strictly, but you're going to get anyone who likes a romance story in any kind of genre. And that would be a great reason why you would want to combine two different genres. Now, let's talk about the ways to do it well, because there are some books out there that seem a little busy because they have maybe too many genres in the book itself. And then it's hard to market the book. Like, does it fit in romance, or does it fit in fantasy, or does it fit in horror, or does it fit in comedy? Sometimes you hear people saying, oh, my book is for everyone because it's got elements of fantasy, it's set in historical fiction, there's a romance, it's dark, and there's comedy throughout. It's hard to find a market for all of those things when you're just throwing all of those genre markers into your pitch, whether it's to a reader or to any professional in the business. So you can't combine a variety of genres and throw them all together hoping the soup is going to taste good. It probably isn't. It's going to taste all conflicting, and then it doesn't make sense, and then, as I said, it's busy, and then your reader's not going to enjoy your book because there's no trail to follow. There's no formula that they can enjoy, because, believe it or not, there are different formulas for romance. But usually there's a formula for romance. They might take a variety of routes to get there, but there is a formula for romance. There's a formula for fantasy. Again, they might take different routes to get to the end result, but there's a formula that you kind of have to follow. And then when you throw all those formulas together, it's like being bombarded by math and you just don't know what to do. So, how do we do this well? First of all, we want to figure out what our main genre is, the why behind our story, the main purpose of our story. One reason why we do this is because once you've written your book and you want to put it up on Amazon or Ingram Spark, or you want to give it to your local bookstore or your library, there's a way to categorize these books. Is it historical fiction? Is it romance? Is it fantasy? They need to know the main base of your book, even though it's a combined genre book. But you should have a main base that you can add the other elements onto, but you need a foundation. So, figure out, what is your foundation? What can you do without? Can you do without the romance, or can you do without the historical fiction? And depending on what your story is, you are the one writing it, so you get to decide. Then based on that, you see that there's one main genre over another. So for example, my first book, Redeemed from the Ashes, is historical fiction, but it's a drama. Yet the story wouldn't live without the actual historical event. And everything that happened after it, the Reconstruction period, and people coming back to their lives after such a devastating loss. The romance in it didn't have to be there. It was an extra that I added, but definitely the drama of the explosion of the event was necessary for this to be, to live, to breathe. That was its main purpose. And so it's historical fiction with a dash of romance throughout. That's one way to realize that you can't have two competing genres equal to each other. You have to have a main one that you build on. So now we're going to get to the fun part where we have the other genre that we want to play with. Identify the markers that you want to insert into your book. So for example, if it's a romance, there are certain markers that mark it as a romance. Are there going to be kissing scenes? Is there going to be scenes where the characters don't know if they're getting together or not, and there's issues coming in the way between them? Identify the markers that you want to put. If it's horror markers, well, is it body horror? Is it horror of the mind? Is it horror from at the hands of another? And then pick your markers, and then that's how you can build upon your foundation. 3, once you have your markers down and it goes with what the story is and how it's going to be told, you have to know when to insert those markers, because if you insert them at the time when it's not appropriate, then it's not going to flow naturally, and you want it to flow naturally for your reader. It has to feel natural. And so there's times when your characters in your story, they're going to experience fear, they're going to experience joy or anger or anxiety. And at those appropriate points, let's say you're focusing more on a historical romance. So for fear, it would be directed more toward perhaps the fear of losing that special someone. Or perhaps you're going to focus more on the joys of love and how they fall in love with each other. Or perhaps there's a jealousy streak in the couple, and so there's that anger coming out. But all directed in the vein of romance. You could do the same with, let's say, fantasy. There's 2 great series that I love. One is called A Great and Terrible Beauty by Aliba Bray, and the other is The Dark Days Club by Alison Goodman. And they're both historical fiction fantasy, mostly fantasy because that's the main plot of the book. You can't really have the book without the fantasy elements, but the historical fiction is there. And so in those books, the certain markers of the way they dress, the way they speak, the geography, the location, are all interspersed at the appropriate times necessary to bring the world that the fantasy is in to life. And that's how you do it. Last but not least, perhaps you're wondering, okay, I have 2 genres. I love these 2 genres. I'm just not too sure which one is the right one to pick as the main genre. Now remember, I'm also going to get into subcategories a little bit, subgenres. But a great way to figure this out would be to break it down logically. Again, as I said, figure out why does your story exist and along what vein does it exist. And then you can also pitch your story idea to readers, give them an in-depth view of what you're working on, and then ask them, what do you think this is? Is this more romance or is it more paranormal? What do you think are the main elements? Get the input of others to help you figure out your genre. Kind of slipping in a little grace note or a little optimism. There are a lot of subgenres that are well known that you can put your book into. So, for example, one big one is historical fiction murder mysteries, which is what my second book is. Very different from my first book. It's based on the gold rush, Caribou Gold Rush in BC 1871. And yet they're very interspersed. You couldn't really have the story without gold being thrown into the mix. But the main thrust of this story is that her father died, and she's kind of following clues to the hunt of who killed her father and where his riches have come from this gold vein. So there are subgenres like historical murder mystery, literary historical fiction, paranormal romance, fantasy romance, dark fantasy, dark comedy. And so because these subgenres are really well known, that would be also an easy way to figure out, okay, I have these two genres together. Do I fit a subgenre that could help a bookstore figure out how to market this book, or how I could upload this book into Amazon and make sure that the categories are all correct? I hope that this training and these little tips of combining genres have been helpful to you. What is your favorite two genres put together? I think mine, it's a tie between historical murder mystery or historical fantasy. I would love to hear yours in the comments down below. If this video has helped you, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel for more author tips on Wednesdays in the future. If you are listening to this on my podcast, thank you so much for stopping by and listening. Please leave a review, and I will see you and talk to you next week.